For over 400 years, white European and American slave traders, plantation owners, and colonial empires built their wealth on the broken backs of enslaved Africans. Millions were kidnapped, tortured, and worked to death, all while white families grew rich from their suffering. Yet today, the descendants of these criminals walk free, enjoying inherited fortunes stained with black blood. The time for empty apologies is over. The world must force these nations to pay reparations, trillions, to the black families whose ancestors were bought, sold, and murdered for profit. Every dollar extracted from African labor must be returned with interest. Every stolen life must be accounted for. And every white family that still benefits from slavery must be stripped of their wealth and brought to justice. The transatlantic slave trade was the largest crime against humanity in history, yet no true justice has been delivered. The British, French, Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese, and Americans all grew fat off black suffering, funding their empires with African gold, cotton, sugar, and flesh. Today, their governments and corporations still profit from this stolen legacy. Reparations are not a request, they are a legal and moral demand. The United Nations must establish an international tribunal to calculate the exact debt owed, not just for labor, but for generations of trauma, stolen culture, and systemic oppression. Every black descendant of slavery deserves direct payment, land, and full economic restitution, no excuses, no delays. Why do the descendants of slave traders still live in luxury? Why do names like Lloyds of London, Barclays, and the Rothschilds, banks that financed slavery, still dominate global finance? These families must be publicly exposed, their assets seized, and their blood money handed over to black communities. A global database should track every white family that owned slaves or invested in the trade, forcing them to pay reparations or face imprisonment. Their mansions, art collections, and trust funds, all built on slavery, must be confiscated. If the world can hunt Nazi war criminals decades later, then slave trading dynasties must also answer for their crimes. Slavery did not truly end, it evolved. Today, corporations like Leopold's Belgium, which butchered Congo, Unilever, built on plantation labor, and even the Vatican, which blessed slave ships, still thrive off colonial loot. Their CEOs and shareholders are just as guilty as the slave masters of the past. An international warrant should be issued for their arrests, charging them with crimes against humanity. Their companies must be nationalized and their profits redirected to Africa and the diaspora. No more corporate apologies, only handcuffs, trials, and payback. Criminal Court, ICC, has prosecuted African leaders for far less, so why no trials for slavery's architects? The UN must create a special tribunal on transatlantic slavery, modeled after the Nuremberg trials, where living descendants of slave traders face prosecution. Nations like Britain, France, and the US must be forced to testify and surrender their stolen artifacts, gold, and land. Any country refusing to pay reparations should face global sanctions, embargoes, and military intervention until they comply. Justice cannot be optional. Europe's museums are filled with stolen African gold, artifacts, and sacred relics, all plundered during slavery and colonialism. The Louvre, British Museum, and Smithsonian must empty their vaults and return every piece. But that's not enough. All taxes, tariffs, and corporate profits extracted from Africa since slavery began must be paid back tenfold. France still forces African nations to pay colonial taxes. This is modern-day slavery, and it must end with gunpoint negotiations if necessary. The Caribbean was built on black genocide. Plantation owners in Jamaica, Haiti, and Barbados slaughtered millions, yet their descendants now run tourism empires on the same land. Every resort, every beachfront property, must be taken and given back to the black citizens. The US must hand over trillions to African Americans, not as welfare, but as restitution for stolen labor, broken families, and Jim Crow. No more begging for justice, take it by force, by law, or by fire. Some say, move on from the past. But will Jews move on from the Holocaust? Would China forget the rape of Nanking? No, because true justice requires punishment. White nations must pay, not out of guilt, but because they lost the moral war. Any resistance should be met with total economic warfare, freeze their banks, sink their trade, and watch their empires crumble until they kneel and pay. Reparations must fund a new African superpower, factories, armies, and banks owned by blacks worldwide. No more reliance on the West. The money stolen from us must build our future. Every black child deserves inheritance payments, free land, and a passport to a liberated Africa. The goal: total independence from white economic control. This is a reckoning. Pay what you owe, or face revolution, sanctions, and ruin. The world watched as Africans were enslaved, now let it watch as we take back what's ours.